Now that Kentucky's roster is essentially constructed, it's time to turn our attention to the recruiting trail, where Mark Pope and the Cats are currently hosting a big-time five-star prospect.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing two big-time five-star recruits, one of them currently on campus, the other about to take a visit to Lexington. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed wherever you are tuned in, I would greatly appreciate it if you went and did so. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky on the recruiting trail. Lots of momentum here to discuss with a number of high-profile recruits. We'll talk about two here today, one that is currently on campus and one that I said he is absolutely going to schedule a visit soon. Five-star guard Jasper Johnson. I believe this is the third time we have now talked about Johnson on the show. He is currently on a visit with Pope and his staff in Lexington, a five-star combo guard that is originally from Lexington, Kentucky. According to his 24/7 Sports page, though, he plays at Link Academy in Branson, Missouri. 6'4", 170 pounds, a top 15 player in the 2025 class. Number 11 to be specific. He's the number 3 combo guard and the number 1 player in the state of Missouri. Auburn, Alabama, Kansas, three other teams here to really be taking a look at alongside North Carolina. If I'm not mistaken, he just recently took a visit with the Tar Heels before he took a visit to Kentucky way back in February. We've talked a little bit about Johnson here on the show, and I've watched a little bit more of his highlight tape, and I've got some more refined thoughts here for you today as he currently visits Big Blue Nation. He's listed as a combo guard at 6'4", but after watching a lot of video on this kid, I would pretty much play him exclusively off ball. He's a very versatile scorer with some legitimate outside range. He is not afraid to take three-point shots, and he hits at a very high clip. If I'm not mistaken, with Team USA just a couple of weeks ago, he shot over 42% from beyond the arc. He was very efficient, as was the entire team throughout their few games, I believe, down in Argentina. He's got a little bit of an odd jumper, but if the ball goes in at a 38 to 42% clip, I mean, you really can't complain. That's above average, and that's very solid for his position. He needs to add strength, I think, to be a legitimate three-way threat in college, to be able to score at the rim, in the mid-range, and the outside. But just based off of his numbers and the way that he plays alone, this player, Johnson, I would put at shooting guard. I would prefer to have somebody else at point guard that is more focused on, I think, distributing, and maybe somebody that plays a little bit better defense, because not to knock on Johnson too hard, this is something I think that will come with development and time as he gets to the collegiate game and as he is able to kind of develop physically, defensively, and just his frame overall. He's very wiry. I don't necessarily know if I would trust that against another high-profile SEC guard, at least in terms of physicality. Now, in terms of ability to score, I think Johnson can hang with the best of them. He's got an excellent shot. And again, form is very odd, but if it's going in at that high of a rate, I think it's pretty good. I don't know if I would trust him at 170 pounds at 6'4" to line up against some of the SEC's best and then consistently play well on defense. And this is something else that scouting reports have said about him. He needs to find ways to contribute on the court outside of score and outside of finding these scoring sprees that he typically goes on. When he gets hot, he gets very, very hot. He is very aggressive in transition, does not have like insane breakaway speed, but he is so effective and aggressive when it comes to getting out and running with the basketball. He can finish, again, at all three levels at the rim in the mid-range, and then obviously from the outside, he's a great, great shooter. But I would like to see, again, him kind of bulk up just a little bit so that he can do what Rob Dillingham, for example, did whenever he first came to Kentucky. He was very wiry. He did not have a lot of muscle, and then he spent the offseason developing physically and then maintaining his aggression at the rim while also learning how to finish through contact. If Johnson was able to put on 15 to 20 pounds over the span of the next year and a half, he would be a very, very well put together player heading into his freshman season. I think that Johnson is definitely living up to the hype, especially as far as his 5-star rating goes. We'll take a look here at what 24/7 has to say about him in word for word, but to finish off my thoughts here, anyone at this point, I think, if you put him in the college game, could bump him off course with the way that he handles the ball. He kind of handles it wide at times, but man, does he have excellent, excellent guard skills. There are concerns I think that some scouts have as far as his ability to impact the game outside of scoring and passing the ball. But as I've said about Johnson here on the show before, if you're going to play him at the 2, which I assume which is what Kentucky would do, he is so lethal as a scorer that you don't necessarily need him to do a whole lot else, especially when you have a very positionless style of play that Mark Pope likes to run, where you have forwards and bigs taking threes and passing the ball around and being really efficient in areas that you would assume your backcourt would kind of lead in. Of course, obviously, BYU has had some pretty solid players there, but this kid fits the mold of what teams like BYU and teams like Kentucky have really found success with in the past, is high scoring, efficient, and lethal guards on offense. Players that bring gravity to the court. It's going to open up things for other players. Now, maybe that plays into him trying to find his way as a point guard a little bit, is that he brings so much attention because of his ability to shoot and score the basketball. You start to see him maybe work into some of those more point guardish tendencies. But again, I would like to pair him up with somebody else. I think that he would be at his best playing off ball, catch and shoot situations, spot up situations, etc. You could easily see him going for 15 to 16 a game in college if you were just to give him that opportunity and for him to kind of find that physicality. So Jasper Johnson, currently on a visit to UK, I think perfectly fits the mold of what Kentucky wants. Development-wise, I think he's going to find his way with time, and I think that physically he's going to get there. This is a product that you should be very, very excited about. Again, 5-star combo guard Jasper Johnson, big-time prospect currently in Lexington. All right, I want to talk a little bit here about a player that is actually ranked higher than Jasper Johnson, Darryn Peterson. His father said he is going to visit Kentucky at some point, and this is a kid that I can give some very, very easy NBA comps to. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at LinkedIn. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs helps find the tools to help find the professionals for your team faster and for free. It is not just another job board. They help you hire professionals you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you are simply looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, over 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You need to hire professionals like a professional over on LinkedIn. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not checked out the show, subscribe to the show today. I'd appreciate it if you went ahead and did so. Thank you so much to everybody who has subscribed, whether that be on the podcast feed or on the YouTube channel. Later on in the show, we're going to do a segment called Bold Predictions, where I take a look at one of your bold predictions for this upcoming season for the Kentucky Wildcats, and I will give you a boldness rating, so to speak, a scale of 1 to 10 as to how bold I think your prediction is. We're going to go over every single one that you guys submit. So if you're listening on podcast, at Locked On UK on Twitter is where you can find me. And if you're listening or watching on YouTube, you can hit us in the comments below. Give me your bold prediction for this upcoming season. It could be about a player and their success. It can be about the team and the rotation. It can be about how far Kentucky goes in the postseason. It can be about their regular season win-loss record. It can be what they do against specific teams. It can be just one single game that you want to give a bold prediction on. Anything you want about Kentucky basketball in the comments below. So we've talked about Jasper Johnson currently visiting Kentucky, every single bit of the 5-star rating that he is. Let's talk about another player that really does intrigue me, a player that we've not discussed here on the show before, and Darryn Peterson. Darren Peterson, a 6'5", 195-pound shooting guard out of Huntington, West Virginia, Huntington Prep. He is the number 3 player in the country in the 2025 class. Number 1 shooting guard and number 1 player, obviously, in the state of West Virginia. This is a very special player. And we'll get into why in just a second. But we mentioned early on in the show, he plans on taking a visit to Kentucky. When will that be? Well, according to KSR, Jacob Polacek over on KSR said, I asked Darren Peterson's father, Daryl, this morning if Darren plans on taking an official visit to Kentucky. His response, absolutely. According to people on this message board, you can go check this out yourself on social media. The graphic that he just recently released about his final schools only had Kansas and Ohio State. Article gave the impression that it was just OSU and KU. Darren's dad reposted it, not knowing our logo wasn't on it. There's, like one user said, there's no really to instigate anything outside of that. So Kentucky, very much so, in this race for 5-star Darryn Peterson. Should have been on the graphic that was released about Peterson's final schools, I should say. This is a player, when you watch his highlight tape, when you see what he's doing on these different circuits and in high school, it is very clear this is an NBA player at some point in the future. Now, how high profile of an NBA player, it's yet to be determined. But this is what I saw from him. I think he's got to become more comfortable initiating and absorbing contact at the rim if he wants to become an elite scorer. Sometimes he's a little skittish around the rim, almost never goes straight at it, instead opens his hand up for a floater. It's almost like he doesn't want to create contact or doesn't want to have a charge drawn on him. Outside of that one flaw, this is probably the most put together, confident scorer I've seen. Insane touch in the mid-range. High release point, beautiful mechanics on fadeaway shots. Also outside shots, very solid mechanics. Could even become more of an aggressive driver, I think, to open some things up in the college game. Just like Johnson, Jasper Johnson. I think both of these guys could do more taking it to the rim. But this player is such a good handler of the basketball, shooter, insane touch at all levels. I would be comfortable letting somebody like Peterson initiate different sets or even pass the ball around, especially if we talk about that word we discussed earlier, especially if he has that gravity like Jasper does that Peterson displays in his highlights. These two players that we're talking about here today would be, I think, an insane 1-2 punch for Kentucky next year. You have on one hand a kid that when he gets hot at any given moment, he is incredibly difficult to stop from outside. On the other hand, you have a shooting guard at 6'5" that is more physical, a little bit more of a bruiser type, I would say, especially when it comes to kind of creating some of that space in the mid-range. Again, finishing at the rim, I think at times can be an issue. But overall, just an insane 1-2 punch scoring the ball in the backcourt. And I would be okay with Peterson passing some stuff around. And if I'm not mistaken, One of his coaches actually recently talked about this, about how he's trying to open some things up to Peterson. And Peterson has said himself he wants to play more of a point guard role. Recently, he's been asked to play more of a point guard role with different circuits and things. And so at 6'5", BYU and Pope saw a ton of players around that height run the point. I think that you could see Peterson in the backcourt at the very least. I think that if you had both of these guys with Johnson and Peterson, I think you could just essentially call them both guards and not say which one is more consistently running the sets. I think both of them would be comfortable with that. And then we get to the comps here. We get to the NBA comps for this 6'5" shooting guard. Oh, again, just insane pure score. One scout I read said that Devin Booker was his comparison. And at the time of reading that, I didn't know what his three-point percentage was. If you go and look at what he did last year with Team USA as a 17-year-old, his three-point percentage was 42.9%, and he was taking about 2.3 threes per game in just like 6 or 7 games with Team USA. So that is similar to Devin Booker's efficiency. If you don't know Booker, if I'm not mistaken, shot 41.1% coming off the bench for Kentucky during that 2015-16 season. I would say, personally, watching him, I would say it's less Devin Booker and more Anthony Edwards. It's more Anthony Edwards, but more efficient. There's a lot more going on in that mid-range area, I think. And that's not to say Booker doesn't have that. He definitely does. But I think physically, when you look at the way that this kid is built, it's more of an Edwards-type build. And Edwards in college was 6'5". Now, when you talk about the numbers, Edwards was kind of a shot chucker at Georgia. He has less than 30% from three. I think he shot 40% from the field overall. This kid is way more efficient. So I don't see him being the shot chucker, quote unquote, that Ant was in college, which he has statistically become way better, by the way, Edwards has in the NBA. I also think that this kid, Peterson, is a more aggressive rebounder. I think the numbers in the highlights show that. 9 rebounds per game with the Team USA at 17. I think that you're looking at a player that definitely fits that Ant mold, I think, more comfortably than he does a Devin Booker style role, if that makes sense. Now, can he shoot? Absolutely. Is that kind of what he is tabbed as an outside shooter exclusively? No. And that's also reflected in the numbers. He doesn't take a ton of threes. He's just really, really good overall scoring. Does he take more threes at a place like Kentucky if he were able to land here? Probably. That would be my guess. But I really like the Anthony Edwards comparison. I think that is what we're dealing with here. Again, like I said a minute ago, you watch this kid play, and it's very clear immediately this is an NBA talent. He's going to visit Kentucky soon. I hope it's sooner rather than later. If Pope was able to secure his services, man, that would be something special for next season. That'd be something to get really, really excited about. So let me know what you think about Darren Peterson in the comments below. Jasper Johnson also as well. 2 big-time players that Kentucky is going after. Let's wrap up the show here with a bold prediction from one of you guys about how many games Kentucky will lose this season. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on all of it over on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. 2 big-time players we've talked about here. I keep saying that over and over. Big-time players with scoring gravity. Let's talk here for a second about a bold prediction. And again, we're going to be going over these every single one of them that you guys submit over the next several weeks. A bold prediction here from Great Kentuckian for this upcoming season. He says Pope only loses 6 games or less this season, 2 at least being non-conference and 4 at least being conference. Kentucky then therefore would have to go 25-6 or better, something that they have not done since 2020 when things really started to fall apart for the Cats. Obviously right as COVID was happening. I think for them to go 25-6 or better, I'm going to give this an 8 on the boldness scale. I'm going to say that out of 10, this is a pretty bold take because of how specific he is, Great Kentuckian is, about the 6 games or less, and then the conference and non-conference split. So 2 from the non-conference. Well, let's take a look at some of the most difficult games here in the SEC and in the non-con slate. Kentucky plays Duke, Clemson, Gonzaga, and Louisville. Those are 4 teams right now that I believe, that are on the schedule, that I believe Kentucky could lose to. It could genuinely lose to any of those 4. Duke, Clemson, and Gonzaga specifically as very difficult matchups for Mark Pope in year 1. Now, the thing Kentucky is going to have going for it is its seniority, is its experience. And I think it's going to also be just the personnel groupings that Mark Pope has. He has a very well-constructed roster. This is what he wants it to look like. And I think they're going to have some success shooting, running, playing good defense at the rim. But Duke, Clemson, and the Zags, those are all going to be 3 very tough outs. Again, 25-6 or better. You cannot lose more than 2 non-con games. There's 3 games right there that I think Kentucky could lose. If I had to pick, I think Kentucky would go 2-2 in that stretch right now. Against the Zags, the Bulldogs, the Tigers. The Zags, the Tigers, the Blue Devils, and the Cardinals. Then you get to the SEC slate. I'm going to split this up by home and away games that Kentucky, I think, would be either not favored in or they would be in a tight game with. Let's start here at home. Alabama is probably going to be the preseason number 1 or number 2 team. Kentucky gets them at home. Arkansas is going to be a tough out. Auburn is going to be a top 5 team. They're going to be a tough out. Florida, I think, is going to be difficult. And of course, Tennessee is going to be tough. All 6 of those games in Rupp, yes, but very difficult. Then you turn to the away slate. You play at Alabama. You play at Georgia. You play at Ole Miss. At Mississippi State, who is going to be good. At Oklahoma and Texas. And you also have a road trip to Knoxville against Tennessee. You've got some very tough games here on the road that you could trip up in. And that's 12 games there? 5 in the home slate, 5 in the home slate. And you've got 7 on the away slate. And Kentucky has to lose just 4 of those. I think it's going to be very difficult unless Kentucky just gets hot. It's going to be very difficult for them to kind of survive all of that, so to speak, and not finish like a 24-7 or a 23-8 or a 22-9. I think that's probably somewhere where Kentucky's kind of floating around right now. And of course, as the schedule is released, because all we know are the home and away opponents for the SEC schedule, as those are released, then maybe we'll get some more information, some more context about how Kentucky could navigate this thing. But until then, I think it's a pretty bold prediction. And I asked for it. This is not a knock, by the way, on Great Kentuckian. I think this is fun. I love speculating about this. Is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible. Is it going to be difficult? For sure. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Drop your own bold prediction. How bold is it to say that Kentucky will go at least 25-6, 2 losses in the non-con slate, 4 in the SEC slate, or better than that record? You leave that in the comments below. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.